Today we are doing a preview stream for Update 35 and Update 36. Update 35 is being patched in today, so anyone who is patiently waiting, you guys get to experience the preview of the content that you'll be able to experience with the return to Carn. And then afterwards, we're going to do a tour of what we're working on in King's Gondor, which is our next major landscape edition, our next level 140 landscape edition. So anyways, again, quick recap. My name's Matt Elliott. I go by Scenario on the message boards. This is a world design focused stream. So I'm not going to be answering any questions regarding things like, lag, PvMP, class balance, those sorts of things, because those aren't really my area of expertise. You're better off asking in a more relevant stream if Orion, for example, decides to run a stream regarding a certain topic. You're going to get a better answer from him on those things than me, or by popping into the weekly Court of the Ring stream, in which our community manager, Cordovan, can try to field some questions for you based off of information that he's gathered. Otherwise, I'd say take it to the message boards. We're active there, and we're happy to chat with you all. So anyways, welcome to the stream. We're starting out our visit here in the brand new version of Carn in Bale Avark, which is the quest hub for this. Now, this update does not include a new major landscape piece. It does include this public hub, which we're checking out here. Kind of reminiscent of other areas you've been in Angmar, kind of ruined, destroyed. Little bits of the hill folk have made their way in, little bits of rangers, a little bit of elves, so everyone's here to kind of scope out what's going on in Carn. And this version of Carn was kind of a, what if we built Carn with our current modern design principles? What if we were to take Carn and build it like we build our cityscapes now? It's a little bit of a departure from how we typically do our landscapes. In one because we wanted to really show off what we can achieve with our tools and our assets now, and it kind of exists in its own little bubble. It doesn't replace existing Carn. We want to maintain that. We wanted to make sure that those folks that had nostalgia for the original Carn and all of its instances would still be able to experience that. It doesn't touch the epic story. What this does is it reimagines Carn. It's not quite a what if. It's a if we were to build it now kind of thing. But it also has small components of it that hint towards where we're going with our story. This is a bit of an interlude. We're picking up our continuing story with Update 36, but with Update 35, we're taking a little interlude that has some breadcrumbs of the story going forward. So here we are. We have this great view of the city. This was something that was like a little bit of a pet project of mine when we wrapped up working on Before the Shadow. I was trying to think about, all right, what do we want to do next? And this was one of the things that I wanted to do. We've talked about where we can improve the landscape, how we can build things to make them modern. Before the Shadow, Swanfleet, and Cardelon were attempts to really show off what we can do with our modern tools and modern design sensibilities in building a brand new beginner region from scratch. And I think it was very, very successful. I think it looks great. And then Carn was an attempt to say, like, well, what if we were to take a good classic old space and bring it up to our standards? We've done a pretty pass on the original Carn a few years ago, but this is really a wholesale, like, from the ground up. Here's a new imagining of the space. So with that in mind, we are taking a look at the overview here. We'll start looking at some of the instance spaces now. With update 35, we have 2 3-person instances, 1 6-person instance, and a raid going into this update. So there's a lot of stuff to kind of help along the end game experience here. Some of you that may have been going into Bullroar have already played through some of these instances before and have gotten to test them. And for those of that you haven't, well, here's a nice sneak preview. I'm not going to show you any of the mechanics that are happening in this space. We're just going to look at these spaces and talk about kind of the design approaches to them from the world design perspective. One of the things that was a little bit of an interesting challenge for everyone here was, after I finished up my Before the Shadow work, I jumped right into building this with the idea of building it as a city, and then the team could come in and do what they want to do what they need to do to kind of make their instances work within the space. Hopefully providing enough of a satisfying hook for all of these places that were reminiscent of the original Carn Doom, that people could kind of sink their teeth into. The other big difference too between this and the original Carn Doom is the original Carn Doom is this massive old school style instance space that can take hours to beat if you're trying to do it on level. And our design approach to instances in general now has shifted towards something that's a little bit smaller, simpler, faster, because we all recognize people have other things to do with their lives beyond just playing the game, and providing them with kind of bite-sized chunks of the game to kind of go in and feel like they're making advancements in, and not absorbing 8 hours of out of your day running an instance that. We're just trying to be respectful of people's time at that point. So we'll look at a couple quick questions before we run around in here a little bit more. So Soft Snake says, why didn't you let us walk from Bale of Arc to the actual Carn Doom entrance? It's just simple landscape down there. So the scope of this update was not going to include anything related to normal landscape. It may appear to be simple landscape for you, but there is a lot of work that goes into making landscape viable for play. And a lot of different teams have to come together to support that. It's not just me building the landscape, it's content needing to make quests and monsters to go in there, game systems needing to come up with loot, and we wanted to really just focus more specifically and heavily on building these instance spaces. If we had a little bit more time for this update, I think it would have been great to add in more open, non-instance playable space through here. But I think what we have now with this instance, or with this location, is a great springboard for any designer who has, spare time in their schedule, which we call lab weeks, to come here and build an instance in a unused portion of it. And there's a lot to build within. So that's why we have not done a simple, walk up to it, because there's just not the time in the day, especially considering everything else that we wanted to do with both this update and with this year, to really bring that in. So here we are in Sant Lor, which is the Poison Gardens. One of our favorite new additions here is kind of the greenhouse, glass house style Angmarum structures. These were something that when the designer who was coming up with the idea for this space, I had already built this area over here, meaning to be reminiscent of one of the other areas in Carn Doom, but with a slight twist on it, of the old Carn Doom with a slight twist on it. They wanted to build something that was, that had that Victorian garden feel, with the glass greenhouses and whatnot. But we wanted to make sure that we gave it a very Angmarum feel to it. And I think these are great. This is a great deco set. It's not necessarily going to get a fairly broad usage. But I think it's like it's interesting. It's unique to this space, and it's something that if we ever have the opportunity to use it in the future, we can. And you also, as one of the rewards for this space, can get you can get wallpaper versions of this appearance. So go down through here. Sebes, are there solo versions of the instances? I know at least the 3-person instances have solo versions. I think the 6-person does as well. I'm not sure about the raid. All right, let's see. Dan Teal asks, so will this new version of Carn Doom completely replace old Carn Doom? No, it does not replace old Carn Doom. This is its own unique thing that's kind of off, off on its own. It's big enough that it has its own map, which is great. And you can see, let's see, if you wanted to get to the map, you can come here and click on Carn Doom, and that will take you to this new Carn Doom map, because we've never really had a zoom in for Carn Doom before. Let's see. Druid's Fire says, what? I'm not supposed to spend all day in game? Well, how are you going to get to PAX if you spend all day in game? Oh yes, I also forgot. If you haven't seen me drink water in a while, please remind me to drink water. Let's see. Dan Teal says, plants don't make me think of Angmar. And that's why here, these are not your normal plants. And the stories that go on in these instances will help kind of bolster and explain what's going on in these spaces. Next up, we had the quintessential sewers experience for Carn Doom. Before Helchkim used to reside in the sewers beneath Carn Doom, and now we've twisted that a little bit. Helchkim does not appear in these spaces, but you do get to fight a variety of other poisoned and toxic themed enemies throughout here. This was a fun space to build too, because it was like, we don't really have very many of these like Undercity style spaces. The underpinnings of a metropolis you don't get to see that much in LOTRO in general, but in Carn Doom specifically. We have a couple of small interior spaces which end up being less sewers and more like caves going through it all. So this was a fun space to build, because a lot of it is just kind of like floating in space. And how do we build something that evokes a sewer but also feels a little claustrophobic? But again, this is a somewhat short space. It actually was a much larger space than it is now. But as the designers were working on it, they were feeling like the pacing between the start location and the first boss and the second boss, the run distance in between was a little bit too long. So luckily, the way that this was built, it was somewhat simple for me to go through and remove some spots here and there. Originally, too, I don't know if it's visible from here, over here was the original entrance, and that was something that, as a point of feedback from the designers, that were just like, this is too much space for kind of the target that we have for the gameplay in here. So we want to shorten it up a little bit, which is why the current entrance is where it is. It's not to say that if another person wanted to have an instance in here, they couldn't use that as the entrance in the future. But for this particular one, you can see here, like, this is blocked off, so all of this over here is inaccessible. So it's just kind of a more focused gameplay experience as you're running through it. Let's see, as we'll scroll down a little bit more. So Magic Shane asks, are you going to update all graphics for starter zones for new players? So a few years ago, we did a polish pass on all of the starter areas. Breland is probably the most dramatic example of that, but the Shire got a pass, as well as Ered Luin. Ered Luin had some actually fairly significant changes to the terrain there. As far as bringing them kind of more in line with um, what we did in Swanfleet and Cardolan, those are actually really hard things to do because it's existing landscape with all sorts of placement happening in it already, along with um, quests and quest objects and all of that stuff. So it's not as simple as doing that kind of revamp and revision on something that's a whole cloth brand new space, because you have to then be very cautious about where you're moving things, how you're moving things. You need to like actually go through and kind of confirm and verify that all of the quests that previously worked still work, and that takes a lot of time and effort to do. So not to say that we won't ever come back to those spaces and give them a substantial overhaul and refresh at some point, but for the short term, that's not really something that we have the time or the capacity to really fulfill, considering that we're moving forward on our continuing narrative. Uh, Scroll down a little bit. Love the giant pumpkins. Feels like a greenhouse that could support the city. Besides the poison, I think one thing that a lot of people, including ourselves, tend to forget is that Angmar has civilization. It has culture. It has things in it that people, basically they need to thrive and survive in there, right? So you have croftlands, you have the hill folk that are, you know, unfortunately pressed into the service of Angmar in order to make things, work for them, to provide food for everyone there, to provide um, minerals and resources. So, it's kind of weird to look at such a desolate place and think, oh yeah, but they also need to make these things if they're gonna live there. Um, and I think the poison gardens are an example of that. Though there are also experiments that are occurring in there that have other purposes. But I think that little garden space was just a fun little I can imagine like some Angmaram priest being like all proud and like, look what I did. I made these pumpkins huge. I made these string beads huge. We can feed our people. And, the person in charge of it was like, yeah, that's great, but how does this serve my evil purposes? Let's see, scroll down a little bit more. Soft Snake says, since you're in Angmar, why didn't you update the Angmar map to the new style? Because we didn't really touch Angmar on a whole. All we did was build this new space for it. And had we gone in and maybe done some revamps on Angmar that kind of necessitated it, we probably would have done that. But that wasn't what was on our plate right now. Usually, whenever we do a map revamp like that, it's because there is a physical change to the actual space itself that kind of requires a bit of a change, whether that's changing the types of rocks that are there or opening up new pathways and whatnot. So that's usually why we strayed away from that. Sebes3 says, do you think the Carn Doom zoom in on a level 50 map directing to a level 40 alternate Angmar is kind of misleading and confusing? I will be the first person to say that I think that our map system and how people navigate it you could use improvement. And it's something that we've been talking about as part of preparing to bring in Umbar, because the way things are organized in our map data is not the greatest. It can be confusing, especially since we're starting to introduce more and more alternate versions of things. We don't have a great way to, show and explain that players are in an alternate version of things. I think we have, like 7 or 8 different versions of Helm's Deep. We have at least 3, if not more, versions of Minas Tirith. And with update 36, we're introducing a new version of Gondor, so we need to have better ways of kind of organizing that data and showing it to players. And I think that's something that is on the forefront of our minds as we start moving towards Umbar. I'm not sure on what timetable that's going to be, but that's something that we're fairly aware of. So Stars and Rangers says, yes, the sewers. This is so nostalgic. Is there a particular set of assets that were a must reuse from the beginning, or did they kind of slot in as you went? Um, so there weren't really, in building all of this, there weren't really any specific assets that I thought of as must reuse beyond these like Tudor style houses and these towers here. Like I think those are fairly iconic of Angmar and of Carn, and I wanted to make sure those were in there. This here is also a major like Angmar POI item. Um, but I also wanted to make sure that where we had the gaps in the structures that we needed, we weren't afraid to bring in other things too. So you'll see, some of these structures are new versions of things that you might have seen in like Dol Guldur and whatnot. Um, so now I just dropped into the beginning of the raid space here. The raid starts you outside and then sends you in to face the villains within Carn. And this is actually, once you get inside, this is actually probably the one space that stayed closest to its original form. Um, I had some serious nostalgia in here, and I wanted to kind of represent that nostalgia. Though part of the problem I had with the original Castle in Carn is one, the original dungeon pieces we were using don't feel that great to me. They're like these round discs that you kind of have to build out more space in order to build up, if that makes sense, to build multiple floors. Um, so one of the things that I really wanted to make sure in here was that I kind of simplified and streamlined that while still keeping the look and feel and flavor of some of these original hallways, which I think I did. Um, the one of the things too is like trying to find ways to add nice extra detail that doesn't complexify too much the playable space. And I do love me these fog volumes. These are great particle effects. And every so often I'll like be not paying attention and there is a like hidden like evil zombie face in one of the particles that just like jumps out and catches me off guard once in a while. Um, so I think if I go this way, right? Oh no, it was down a level. Never mind. So we'll not do that right now. We have the new and revamped throne room. This was just a fun space to kind of play in and whatnot, because like I said, there's this nostalgia to it that feels great. So Soft Snake says Angmarum Premium Homestead now, but don't put it where you did, like in Kingstead. So actually, way back when this was Middle Earth Online, um, the idea was that there would be good and evil playable factions, and they would have all of the like features and functions that they that any normal player would, and that each kind of race had its own housing. And a lot of these, building block pieces that are for Angmar have their origins in an old Angmar housing set. Are you going to update the game engine soon or in phases? As game designer myself, would need a massive revamp of graphics. So we're always we're always tinkering on the engine. We have a great tech art team that is always looking at and thinking about ways to improve how we're working on things and rendering things. This latest update has update to how water and shadows interact with each other, which is great. It might take some people a little bit to get used to because they're not used to seeing shadows cast on water. Like, we had several bugs come in where someone was like, "There's this weird shape on the water," and it's like, well, that's because the building next to the water is actually casting its shadow on the water, and it's not something that they had ever seen before, so it really kind of like surprised them. So we're running through right now. These are portions of the city that are not currently a part of the update, but just wanted to show off that these are spaces that eventually could be flushed with additional instances and things to do inside them whenever we have designers ready and able to go on it. And I think that's one of the things that we really wanted to leverage the space for, as a space for if a designer was particularly inspired and had the time to do it. This was a great place to just like build an instance without having to worry about needing to build a whole new space. The space is here, the space exists, and they can use it to do what they want and how they want and when they want. Scroll down a little bit more. Let's see. Can you answer on how many encounters the new raid will have and how many bosses? I don't know that answer off the top of my head. I've been kind of like, I delivered these spaces, and outside of some polish here and there, I've been pretty hands-off as the designers have been going through and building things. So I'm not really able to answer that question for you because I don't know off the top of my head. So Magic Shane asks, do you reckon all the game will be updated with all the areas like the starter zone for new players and all sorts? I'm not sure what you mean by that question. If you mean by like graphics up, polish passes and whatnot to update what those areas look like, I think it's a matter of time and opportunity. And right now, our focus is very heavily on providing endgame content and helping to kind of move forward our narrative. And unfortunately, that means that since we're moving forward with our narrative, older regions are not going to have the opportunities for polish that they might have if we were building them from scratch. So like Swanfleet and Cardelon, since we built them from scratch, those are going to be fairly polished looking. But other older areas, unless there is a specific and intentional need for us to go back into those spaces in the short term, probably not going to get much update on them for the time being. And again, I just want to restate, I'm not answering questions about lag. I'm not answering questions about classes, game systems, skills, PvMP. Like, all of those things are outside of my area of expertise. So if you have questions about those things, I recommend reaching out to the appropriate individual on the message boards or waiting for a stream from one of those individuals who can answer those questions. This is a world design focused stream, and those are the kinds of questions that I can respond to and I can answer. Let's see. Stars and Rangers ask, is there anything new added to the city here that you've always wanted to include in an Lotro city? Well, I think for me the biggest thing in running around here was making sure that there was a lot of interconnectivity and a lot of changes in verticality that weren't necessarily confusing. I did a lot of this kind of stuff in um, Gundabad, which was a lot of fun playing with verticality. And I think here in what we're doing here, you get a good sense of verticality as well. Um, but there's, if you were to ever be in this space in a like open world playable sense, you'd find a lot of like interconnection between things. And I think that's something that, as we think about other like larger cities that we might build, is important to kind of really include in that. So 70x1c says, do you play this game as a normal player, or do you ever play content like fellowships and raids? So I do. I play. You know, I have a lot of games that I need to play, but I do make sure that I try to dedicate time to play Lotro, both as a regular player and as just like playtesting for landscape balance and whatnot. So I spend a little bit of time over the week. I usually focus more on solo play, largely just because, between work and life, I don't personally really have a lot of time to invest into grouping and whatnot. So my time and effort is usually spent on solo play. I've been doing a lot of delvings lately and seeing, how much I can push my Bjorning. And some delvings are easier to handle for my Bjorning than others. Anything that has, ranged damage, particularly things like Fell Spirits, tend to just chew up my Bjorning like nothing, but things like Brigands and Uruks I can just mow right through. So it's interesting seeing what the different delving settings have done to me. I did recently also get my honey goat mount, because I've been wanting that for a while. I have it on my Guardian, but my Bjorning is my current main, so I'm happy to have gotten it. Let's see if I can make my way out of this dungeon, and then we'll move on to what everyone is really here for. If I can remember. I built this dungeon, and now I don't remember where to go to get out of it. Bloop, bloop, bloop. Hallmark of a good dungeon if you get lost in it. It's the left-hand rule, right? Always turn right. Never turn left. Eventually you'll get out of the dungeon. But yeah, this in general space was a lot of fun to build, and I'm hoping... Oh, there we go. That's what I was looking for. And I'm really hoping that over time our designers are able to, really fill it up with more things in it, because I think that's like... That would really just like make it feel like a evolving and fulfilled dungeon experience. All right, I'm almost to the exit, which is right up here. All right, Whiskers420XD says, what are the challenges you face when you come to world designing new areas like this? Is there an area you would absolutely love to go back to and improve/redo? So I think our biggest challenges is trying to find the right balance between what we build and how the space is used, and how we try to, make things feel fresh between different areas. We want to, we do have some areas that feel somewhat similar, and that is like intentionally done that way in order to suggest and imply an ecology and an ecosystem that connects between areas. And I think, for me, if I were to try to um, go through and make, kind of like approach something with like a fresh set of eyes and seeing how we could do it better. Honestly, like I feel like Foreshell is probably a space that I'd like to tackle more because there are certainly like traversal issues in that region, and I think too we've learned a lot over the years, and it would be a great opportunity for us to really try to sell that biome a little bit more. I think it's generally successful, but I think that there are certain assets that we could get and we could bring in, that we could make that would really help sell the natural features of the space a little bit better. Let's see. Does the new Carn Doom map help you navigate all of this? Well, so the biggest difference is like running around in this space right now. This is not a space that players are generally going to be able to get into. So the map is more just there for completion purpose than anything else, because each instance space is either occurring inside its own dungeon, which will have its own map, or it is in a small and contained enough space that a map isn't really entirely necessary for it. All right, let's. So now we've taken a look at what we're doing here in Carn Doom and given you some ideas about what we might also do in the future. I know I've got ideas for instances I'd like to build in here and have started speccing it, but I don't know when that'll happen. So now for the meat and potatoes, what people are really, really here for, I'm sure, the preview for Update 36. This is what we're doing. We have. Before I do that, there was one request for me to rocket jump myself up to give a high overhead view of things. And back down we go. As I fly through all... I don't even know why that effect has, like, an explosion associated with it. I think someone was just being silly. But, alright. So, So, as some of you may have seen while being on Boror, there were some changes that were visible from the fields of Pelennor that you could kind of get up to and kind of look at, but not close enough to actually touch. This is the start of the reclamation of Gondor. Prior to, and we'll get there as soon as it loads, prior to King Elisar beginning his grand tour of his lands and trying to bring peace to them all, it's up to the players to kind of get in there and see what other threats remain. So, big caveat here as we're starting to look at all of these things. All of what you're about to see is currently in development. There's nothing here that is ready to ship yet, but it is all far enough along that we thought we'd give you an idea to see what King's Gondor is going to look like. Those of you familiar with normal Gondor, it's a pretty dark and dire space. We have what we call the Dawnless Day kind of influencing much of it, particularly the spaces that we're going to be going to in Update 36. So people have only known, players have only known this dark and gloomy representation of Gondor. They've only known this Gondor under siege with towns and cities being razed and refugees hiding in the mountains. We're going to Gondor in a more hopeful time now. The war has ended. Enemies have fled or have been driven out, but there are still pockets remaining, and there's this general kind of sense of rebuilding and still some unease about what's going on in the world right now. King's Gondor was an opportunity for us to basically give Gondor a fresh coat of paint. It is not replacing existing Gondor. It is a brand new version of Gondor that will be accessed from the after-battle version of Minas Tirith and the Pelennor Fields. King's Gondor for Update 36 consists of Lossarnak, consists of Upper Lebanon and Lower Lebanon, ending at Linhir. Update 38 will include the remainder of King's Gondor, as well as introducing an area a region we're calling Outer Gondor, along with our expected trip to Umbar. So here we see, the walls being repaired, things under construction, giant slabs of things. There's no NPC presence in here yet because we're still kind of figuring out internally what we want to do with this kind of reconstruction, how the characters are going to interact, what kind of work should be going on. I did. I have just this story in mind. Is like I would love for Thornley to make his way down here and offer his help and just kind of get laughed out. That would entertain me to no end. So here we are in Harlund. When players first come through here, it is like absolutely devastated. It is ruined. And now it's in the process of being reconstructed. It is the closest town to Minas Tirith, so it kind of makes sense that this ruined city is one of the first ones that gets updated, that gets repaired, gets restored. We do have all of our town services in place, as well as some quest NPCs for the epic story. But actually, later today is when we really start kicking off some of our story planning for what we're going to build here. One of the things that I have not built yet, but that I want to do, is make sure that we have memorials for the fallen characters built around. So we have this small graveyard here, which represents the loss of Harlund. Another thing that we are doing in these areas is we are building out the landscape a little bit more. We are adding more landscape than was originally in these areas, kind of bringing down some walls, smoothing out some cliffs, adding more explorable space. Because it felt like, you all have explored Gondor, and now you need a little bit extra to kind of experience. So, for example, here we are, and ignore Breland, we are not actually in Breland, we're still in Gondor. But these are the hills to the north of Harlund that you can fully climb up and explore around, and there may be, at some point, small encampments and other threats hiding out in these hills. Let's see if we can get to a good vantage point here before we continue on with our tour. That is not a cliff I can climb. So the setting for this is intended to be summer. So our thought is that, as additional polish, we'll go through and update what our scene files have to make things a bit more summery. Don't mind me as I fall off a cliff. I think one of the things that was tricky too in thinking about expanding these areas was a lot of Gondor's areas are in valleys or in fairly narrow spaces. So it was a little tricky to think about, like, well, how do we add a little bit more playable space in here for exploration purposes, for hunting purposes? I think one of the things that was somewhat successful for us in Carlon and Swanfleet was we didn't feel we needed to make sure every single square inch of the region had something in it. We wanted to kind of let the landscape speak for itself in some spots. Don't mind the prevalence of goats. This is all just because we don't actually have our creature profiles set up for this area yet. So when I stubbed them out, I was just like, goats. They're all going to be goats. Which is usually how we set things up. So yeah, it's welcome to Goat Door for the time being, anyways. So we'll look some more questions before running around. Yao says, so we'll finally have access to that inner mountain over the Cape of Belphilus. So not as part of update 36, but we are going to expand into that mountain range as part of update 38. So there's that to look forward to. Like I said, we want to make sure that we feel like we're doing some new and fresh stuff throughout here. We don't want it to all just be the same landscapes that you've been in before with a different skybox and a slightly different color and flavor to them. We want to do something new. We wanted to add something new, even if it's just a little space that you can get in and explore around and just have the experience of finding the little nooks and crannies. Um, we're also like leveraging our new rock sets, which are, I think, one of my favorite things of recent memory, and they were really successful for us in Carnarvon and Swanfleet, and I'm excited about them being used here as well. Um, and I think like some towns definitely like take advantage of them better than others. Like some like really work well. One of the challenges that we're coming up on too is like we're about to run into Imloth Melwi right now, and this is one of the spaces in Gondor where there were a lot of refugees here. A lot of refugees from the war were hiding here, and now that that's over, we need to figure out what to do with all of these refugees. We don't necessarily want these spaces like Imlath Welwi and Tumladen to be so heavily populated with people because there's not really a reason for them to be anymore. The war's over. People should be going back home. Um, rocket jump. So let me. Okay. Let's just shortcut our way through some stuff. Since you all have seen these, it's just mostly most of the polish on these places was largely just a rock pass, kind of playing with these new rocks and making them work and things. However, as we get into some of the other cities, like Arnak here, you'll be able to see, and I will, oh, this is a high physics wall. There we go. You'll be able to see some of the changes that we're making to cities to kind of reduce our reliance on platforms, entities within the space to kind of reduce entity count and leverage more of our landscape and our terrain painting capabilities to build these spaces. And doing that kind of like requires a little bit more setup on our part, but I think it also gives us a lot more. It gives us an ability to have a lot more detail in the kinds of spaces that we build. Because with terrain, we can layer on detail and texture and whatnot without having to worry about incurring additional entity cost. So as you can see here, like this was originally just a platform. Now it's actually terrain, and we can paint in the rubble, the dirt, the flower petals, and have a little bit more control of that without the associated costs of adding a new entity. Um, so I have to make up some time because I have been talking way too much, and there's still a bunch to see. So maybe I don't want to bump up to run 3 because uh, that'll just make things load a little bit slower. Um, but I do want to show kind of the next, at minimum, I want to be able to get into the next major section of landscape that kind of had its walls pulled down, so we can take a look at that real quick, and you can see that. Which I don't think we've come up with a name for it yet, but it is there are mountain valleys in Lower Lebanon that we are opening up as well. But also here we have, this will take us to Tumladen. We have also pulled down some of the terrain here around Tumladen, and Tumladen is now more of a surrounded city. It's no longer kind of built into the mountains. You can run around it. You have these glades and forests around it to the north that you can get into. Let's see. I'll see if I can answer any more questions. Sebas asks, will you import the new landscape changes and additions like in Asnul Bazaar and Lothlorien? That is TBD. It really depends on how much time we have to build things, and what complexities and problems that might cause in the existing space. Because to build this space, it's effectively a from scratch space. We copied the base terrain to do this work, but we got rid of all of the quest objects and everything like that. Bringing over these landscape changes into the pre-war or during war version of Gondor, there is the risk that we could accidentally bury quest objects and whatnot because of these changes, and we want to be very careful. So that is a maybe if we have time and it makes sense, but not necessarily guaranteed that it will happen for update 36 or at all kind of stance. So let's see. So is it, Dantiel asks, is it easier, faster to build new landscape that is based directly on an existing landscape or from scratch? It depends on what we're doing with the landscape. I think that there's a certain economy to what we're doing here, but we also don't have to worry about, in building this, we didn't have to worry about existing quest objects because we had to delete them all. We had to clear it out. All the old NPCs are gone. All the old quest objects are gone. Like, all of it is gone and needs to be, and new stuff needs to happen. We get a view of Pelargir from here. All right. So let's run ourselves up. So for those of you that are familiar with Gondor, so we're now kind of crossing into Lower Lebanon. You can see here in the distance we have Iranos here, and to the north of it there is now a new road that leads into the north. Let me get us over there. And while we're done with dwarves as a major protagonist for the foreseeable future, there are dwarves that live in the White Mountains, and they are lending their hand and support to Gondor in its time of reconstruction. So you can see here a small outpost with rocks hewn from the mountains above that Gondor will be using to rebuild everything. Let's see. So Druidfry says, "Wait, are they coming back to reclaim Belfalis housing?" We're actually not quite sure what we want to do with this version of the Cape of Belfalis. We might do some monster camp work in there. We're not sure, but that's something that we still have to figure out our plan and whatnot for. Cynic asks, is it possible to update this game to the Unreal 5 engine? Unfortunately, no. This is its own proprietary engine, and doing that would kind of be tantamount to just making the whole game over again. It's not as easy as just swapping out one thing for another. There'd be a lot of work involved. So I've always wondered where all the quarries were that were used to build all of these huge structures. So you're in luck. One of the things that we will stop at real quick, and we should be able to get through all of this before the end of the stream, is a quarry. And it was actually kind of fun because I don't think I've personally built a quarry since I worked on Scary in the Shire so many years ago. But here we go. Again, remember, all of this is still in progress, so there's definitely polish and work to be done in all of these areas, but we do have a quarry here. One of the other big things that we've been working on, trying to find our solutions to, is the shared appearance issues that keep cropping up. And the rocks, of course, are one of the biggest culprits. So with this update and with what we did in Swanfleet and Cardalon, is kind of like moving forward on a scheme of how we use rocks and how we use certain assets to make sure that, at least as we build new areas, those kinds of bleeds don't happen, or at least do not happen as frequently as they do. We make a change with the intention of helping performance, and it has other side effects. Like, the space may perform better, but now you get your Mordor rocks in Breland, and no one likes that. So yes, so this dwarf fortress up here is a bit of a tease. You can get all the way up here as part of Update 36, but you cannot actually enter it. It is sealed off for the time being, and will not be open until Update 38. But you get this awesome view from here. So I think at this point, I'm going to wrap up this stream. There's still plenty to see and do here in Update 36 Gondor, and I suspect that we'll at least do one more preview stream of this for folks that might have missed it as we get closer to the Update 36 release. If anyone has any more questions, feel free to fire them off. Otherwise, I will wrap this up. So we'll go down through here real quick. Whiskers asks, are you guys going to work on post-war Gondor exclusively, or do you think there will be when our expedition to the south is over, we have perhaps go to the east and work with seeing post-war Rohan, or perhaps even the resettlement of Khazad-dûm? So right now we are all in on the Umbar train, and that's kind of where our focus is right now. Who's to say what storylines and plot lines will get picked up during that, and what stories we'll tell during that? I think this kind of story that you're suggesting is actually a great opportunity for things like our further adventures mission content. Vroom Fondel says, wasn't there a quarry in Farinorian? Yes, there was. Unfortunately, I was not on the project at the time that was built, so my statement of it's been a while since I've built a quarry still stands. And even then, I don't think there are very many quarries in general. I'd love to have a new version of Ithilien, says Solify. Sorry if I butchered that. There may be opportunities for that in the future. It all depends on where we go with our story. And let's see. Last call for questions, but I don't see very many in here. So thank you, everyone, for joining the stream and for hanging out, asking your questions, and taking a look at Update 35 and Update 36's World Editions. If you haven't already, get to patching. Update 35 is going live today, so you've got brand new instances to explore. I believe the 3-man's and the 3-person and 6-person instances are going to be available at launch, and the raid will be available down the road. For those of you that are going to PAX, enjoy it. I know the other game is doing an event there, and I think some folks from the LOTRO team may be present for that. So if you haven't RSVP'd, I'm not sure if there's still room for it, but doesn't hurt to check out. But anyways, thank you so much for hanging out and taking a look at all this stuff with me. And next stream, we'll be probably back to our regular scheduled exploration. I think next will probably be Western Rohan. So thank you, everyone. Have a great afternoon and have a great week.